There's something we don't talk about enough, something that might make you uncomfortable, but I'm going to say it anyway. Not everyone deserves your help. I know. That sounds harsh, doesn't it? It sounds like something a selfish person would say, a cold person, someone who lacks compassion. But let me ask you something. Have you ever poured everything you had into someone, gave them your time, your energy, your wisdom, your resources, only to watch them throw it away? Only to see them return to the exact same patterns that got them into trouble in the first place? And worse, have you noticed how helping certain people doesn't just fail to help them, it actually diminishes you? Like something inside you gets smaller every time you say yes. This is what spiritually awake people understand. And it's not cruelty, it's clarity. Because you see, there are people in this world who will drain every drop of light from you, and they won't even thank you for it. Not because they're evil, necessarily, but because they're operating from a different frequency. A frequency where your help isn't help at all. It's just fuel for their patterns, permission to stay exactly as they are. Let me tell you about 7 types of people that those who are truly awake have learned to recognize, and more importantly, learn to step away from, not with anger, not with judgment, but with the understanding that sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is nothing at all. I'm going to tell you something I've never admitted out loud. I once spent 2 years trying to help a friend. Let's call him Marcus. Smart guy, talented, full of potential. But every 6 months, like clockwork, his life would fall apart. He'd lose a job, get evicted, have some crisis that required immediate intervention. And every time I showed up, I helped him move, loaned him money, connected him with opportunities, listened to his plans for turning everything around. And every time he'd nod, agree, promise this time would be different. But it never was. Because Marcus didn't want to change. He wanted someone to make his life comfortable enough that he didn't have to. And I was so busy being helpful, so invested in being the good friend, the spiritual person who shows up for others, that I couldn't see what was actually happening. I wasn't helping him grow. I was helping him stay stuck. This is the first type. The person who refuses to help themselves. And here's what nobody tells you about them. They have made an unconscious decision that someone else should carry their weight. Not because they can't, but because they've learned that someone always will. You see them struggling, and your heart opens. Of course it does. You're a good person. You want to ease suffering. But watch what happens when you help. Do they take your assistance and build on it? Or do they take it and sink back into the same patterns, knowing you'll be there next time too? The spiritually awake understand something crucial. When you help someone who refuses to help themselves, you're not being compassionate. You're being complicit. You're participating in their stagnation. You're preventing them from feeling the discomfort that might finally wake them up. And it costs you, not just time or money, it costs you something deeper. Your energy, your faith in people, your own sense of clarity. Because every time you pour into a vessel with a hole in the bottom, part of you knows it's pointless, and that knowing creates a kind of spiritual exhaustion that's hard to name. Then there are the ones who always have a reason why everything is someone else's fault. You know these people. Their life is a series of betrayals, injustices, unfair circumstances, and every story ends the same way. It wasn't my fault. The boss was prejudiced. The system is rigged. Their family is toxic. Their ex was crazy. The world is against them. And some of this might even be true. Life isn't always fair. People do get bad breaks. But here's the question. What are they doing about it? Because the spiritually awake have learned to distinguish between someone who's been knocked down and is trying to get back up, and someone who's made being knocked down their entire identity. The person who's made victimhood their home address. I knew a woman once, Sarah. Every conversation, and I mean every single one, was about how she'd been wronged. Her childhood, her marriage, her job, her friends. The list was endless. And at first, you want to comfort. You want to validate. You think, she's been through so much. But 3 years later, she's still telling the same stories, still angry at the same people, still waiting for someone to apologize, to acknowledge, to make it right. And nothing you say, no perspective you offer, no compassion you extend makes any difference. Because she doesn't want to heal. She wants witnesses. She wants people who will agree that yes, life has been unfair to her. Yes, she has every right to be angry. Yes, she's the victim. And if you stay too long in that energy, something happens to you. You start seeing the world through her lens. Everything becomes heavy. Everything becomes unfair. You catch her resentment like a contagious disease. The spiritually awake step back from this, not because they lack compassion for suffering, but because they understand that you cannot heal someone who is committed to their wound. You cannot free someone who has built their identity around being trapped. And trying to do so only traps you alongside them. Can I be honest with you about something? There are people who will take everything you offer and treat it like it was owed to them. Like your help wasn't a gift but a payment on some invisible debt they believe you carry. These are the ones who never say thank you, never acknowledge what you've done. And if they do, it's followed immediately by why it wasn't enough. The apartment you helped them find is too small. The money you loaned them wasn't quite sufficient. The job you connected them with isn't prestigious enough. And here's what's so insidious about this. They make you feel guilty for not giving more, for having boundaries, for being human with your own limitations. I once helped someone pay their rent for 3 months while they got back on their feet. Month after month, I sacrificed things I wanted because I believed I was helping someone in genuine need. And do you know how they responded when the 3 months ended and I couldn't continue? They were angry, not disappointed, not understanding, angry, as if I had broken a contract, as if their need created an obligation in me that had no expiration date. This is what entitlement looks like. And the spiritually awake recognize it immediately because they understand something fundamental. Gratitude is not just politeness. Gratitude is the sign of someone who recognizes they are part of something larger than themselves. Someone who understands that gifts are not rights. When gratitude is absent, when someone treats your generosity as their due, you're not dealing with someone who needs help. You're dealing with someone who believes the world owes them. And no amount of help will ever fill that void, because the void is not about what they lack, it's about what they believe they deserve. Helping them doesn't lift them up. It confirms their distorted worldview. And it drains you spiritually, because somewhere deep inside, you know your generosity is being devoured by something that can never be satisfied. Then there are the ones who don't really want your help. They want your validation. They don't want wisdom. They want you to confirm what they already believe. And if you dare offer anything that challenges their view of themselves, they will reject you entirely. These are the people who ask for advice but argue with every suggestion, who come to you with problems but have already decided on the solution, who say they want to change but get defensive the moment change is actually suggested. I'm going to tell you something that might sound terrible, but it's true. Some people are not suffering from a lack of knowledge. They're suffering from an abundance of pride. And pride is a fortress you cannot breach from the outside. It can only be dismantled from within. The spiritually awake have learned to recognize arrogance disguised as seeking. The person who says, "Help me," but means agree with me. The person who says, "I want to grow," but means tell me I'm already perfect. You cannot help someone who believes they already know. You cannot teach someone who thinks they're the teacher. And trying to do so is like throwing seeds on concrete. Nothing grows, nothing changes. You just waste the seeds, and it exhausts you in a particular way, because you can see so clearly what they need to hear, what they need to understand. But they can't receive it, won't receive it, and you're left holding wisdom that has nowhere to go, truth that falls on closed ears. The spiritually awake simply walk away, not with judgment, but with the understanding that until someone is humbled, until they're broken open enough to admit they don't have all the answers, no help you offer will penetrate. And you're better off saving your energy for those who are actually ready to receive it. Here's something else, something darker. There are people in this world who are not confused. They're not struggling. They're not victims of circumstance. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it anyway. These are the ones who lie without hesitation, who manipulate without remorse, who harm others and justify it without a second thought, not occasionally, not by accident, but as a way of life. And they're often very good at appearing helpless, at playing the part of someone who just needs one more chance, one more opportunity, one more person to believe in them. But the spiritually awake can feel it, that coldness underneath the performance, that emptiness where empathy should be, that sense that you're not dealing with someone who's lost, but with someone who has chosen a path that leads to darkness and who wants you to fund the journey. I once watched someone help a person like this. Gave them money, resources, second chances, third chances, and every single time those resources were used to harm others, to continue patterns of manipulation and destruction. The helper became, without meaning to, an enabler of genuine harm. This is what makes this type so dangerous, because your compassion becomes their weapon. Your desire to see the good in everyone becomes the blindness they exploit. And by the time you realize what's actually happening, they've moved on to their next benefactor, leaving you wondering how you could have been so naive. The spiritually awake protect themselves from this, not by becoming cynical, but by trusting their intuition, by recognizing that some people have made wickedness their home, and that pulling them out requires them to want to leave, which they don't. They're quite comfortable where they are. They just want you to make it more comfortable. Then there are the ones who never learn, who make the same mistakes over and over and over again, who touch the hot stove and then act surprised when they get burned, every single time. These are not people who lack intelligence. They're people who lack the capacity or willingness to learn from experience. The lesson comes, they ignore it, the consequence arrives. They're shocked, the pattern repeats. They're confused, and somehow, mysteriously, they always need someone to rescue them from the consequences they've created. Again, and again, and again. Here's what this does to you. It makes you feel insane, because you can see the pattern so clearly. You can predict exactly what's going to happen. You warn them. You offer guidance. You try to help them see. And they nod. They agree. They promise. And then they do the exact same thing. I knew someone who got into financial crisis every few months. Same pattern. Spending beyond their means. Ignoring bills. Making impulsive purchases. And every time someone would bail them out, their parents, their friends, credit cards. And every time they'd say, I've learned my lesson, this won't happen again. But it always did, because the lesson wasn't about money. The lesson was about consequences. And as long as someone kept rescuing them from consequences, there was no reason to change. The spiritually awake understand this. They understand that some people will only learn through pain, through hitting bottom, through finally experiencing the full weight of their choices without anyone cushioning the fall. And that helping them avoid that moment is not kindness, it's interference with their growth. It creates a particular kind of mental exhaustion, the frustration of watching someone sabotage themselves repeatedly, the helplessness of knowing you can't save someone from themselves, the guilt of stepping back when they're in crisis. Again, but the spiritually awake do it anyway, because they know that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone fall completely, so they can finally learn to stand on their own. And finally, there are the shapeshifters, the ones who are the hardest to recognize because they don't come with demands. They come with stories. They don't take directly. They make you want to give. These are the masters of manipulation. They know exactly what to say, exactly how to play on your emotions, exactly which buttons to push to make you feel special, needed, important. And before you know it, you're doing things for them you would never do for anyone else. With one person, they're the victim. With another, they're the hero. They change their story depending on who they're talking to. And if you ever compare notes with others who've dealt with them, you'll find the stories don't match. The facts shift. The narrative morphs. But here's what makes them so dangerous. They're not necessarily conscious of what they're doing. Many of them have been playing these games so long, it's become automatic. They genuinely believe their own performances. They've lost touch with what's real and what's manipulation. And you can feel it. Even if you can't name it, there's something off, something that doesn't quite add up. A feeling in your gut that says something is wrong here, even when everything on the surface seems fine. The spiritually awake trust that feeling. They've learned that intuition is often faster and more accurate than logic, that their body knows things their mind hasn't figured out yet. And when that alarm goes off, they don't ignore it. They don't talk themselves out of it. They don't give more chances to prove their suspicion wrong. They simply step back, create distance, protect their energy, because they understand that helping a manipulator doesn't help them change, it just helps them get better at manipulation. You become practice. You become proof that their tactics work. You become another person they can point to as evidence that they're fine, that people care about them, that they're not the problem. And it leaves you feeling confused, gaslit, doubting your own perceptions, because they're so good at making you feel like you're the one who's wrong, like you're being paranoid, like you're being unfair. This is soul draining in a way that's hard to describe. Because you're not just tired, you're disoriented. You've lost trust in your own ability to read people, to see clearly, to know what's real. So what do we do with all of this? You might be sitting there thinking, this sounds cruel. This sounds like giving up on people, like lacking compassion. But let me ask you something. Is it compassionate to enable someone's dysfunction? Is it spiritual to sacrifice yourself on the altar of someone else's refusal to grow? Is it loving to pour your life force into people who will only use it to stay exactly as they are? The spiritually awake understand something that most people miss. That true compassion sometimes looks like stepping back. That real love sometimes requires you to let someone struggle. That genuine help often means refusing to help. Because you see, your energy is not unlimited. Your time is not infinite. Your capacity to give is not bottomless. And when you pour yourself into people who cannot or will not receive it, who will only drain you and demand more, you're not just hurting yourself. You're also making yourself unavailable to the people who actually are ready, who actually want to grow, who actually would use your help to become more, not to stay the same. There are people in this world who are waiting for someone like you, someone with wisdom, with compassion, with resources, with time. But they'll never find you if you're exhausted from carrying people who refuse to walk. If you're depleted from giving to those who only take. If you're spiritually empty because you've confused self-sacrifice with service. The spiritually awake have learned to recognize the difference between someone who's struggling and someone who's stuck, between someone who wants help and someone who wants a savior, between someone who will grow from your assistance and someone who will only use it to stay comfortable in their patterns. And they've learned something else. That saying no is not selfish. That protecting your energy is not cruel. That walking away is sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for them too. Because sometimes the only thing that will wake someone up is the absence of people willing to keep them asleep. Sometimes the only thing that creates change is finally experiencing the full consequences of their choices. Sometimes the only way someone learns to stand is when everyone stops carrying them. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you care wisely. You give discerningly. You help those who are ready to be helped, and you step back from those who aren't, not with judgment, but with clarity. Not tomorrow, not when it's easier, not when they've proven they don't deserve your help. Now, right now, in this moment, look at your life, look at who you're helping, and ask yourself honestly, is this help actually helping, or is it just making you smaller while keeping them the same? The answer is there. You already know it. The question is whether you'll finally listen.